Start.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shivam. Yeah, I'm too young for this. Shivaji asked me to do this. Yeah, I'm not sure what introduction I should give either. I've never met Master K. Too young for that. And I wouldn't even say I've read extensively. I've read a little bit. So, so whatever little I've tried understanding and explain. So, let's see if I can change slides. Okay. Honestly, these are the only 4 or 5 pages I've read carefully. Okay, these are so. This is in lessons on Purusha Suktam. The introduction has like lesson 1, which is like 15 pages. I've probably read the first 4.5 carefully, and that's it. I don't, but I can honestly say these 4 pages have been the most influential parts for most of my thinking. So I mostly just paraphrase what's happening there in what I understand and how that relates to things that I do. So yeah, so that's that. Fine. So first, we'll start with a simple question. What do we mean by true? Etymologically, the word true comes from roots in lots of Proto-Indo-European languages like Deru. So usually they mean like firm, solid, steadfast. So for instance, the word dhruva, which means like axis, comes from the same root in Sanskrit. And the word in Sanskrit for true is actually even better. It's satya, which comes from the root as, which means to be. That's where we get asti from, also in Sanskrit. So when you're asking the question, what is true, what you're actually asking is like, what is, right? What is that? Okay, so let's just look at some. Nothing I say will be very complicated. It'll be very, very straightforward. Won't be anything to say. It'll be very pedestrian. So examples of true sentences. So I am speaking to you. Okay, I am seeing you. I read the slide. But there's other sentences I can make. Room is big. Slide background is white. Tasty food. These are all true sentences. These are all true sentences. I hope most people agree with the last sentence. But there's a difference. There's a qualitative difference. The first ones are statements of personal facts. They're true to me. The second one are kind of impersonal facts. There's no mention of I there, right? But that's a little strange because that's making assumptions about things. So I can turn them to mean the same thing, but again being personal statements. So I can say, I see a big room. I see a white slide background. I taste tasty food, right? Same meaning contained in these sentences, but now these have become personal statements of fact. Okay, great. Now, each of these sentences is essentially a statement of experience now, right? They're all statements of experience. And everything that's a statement of experience has the following structure. So let's take one of those examples. I am seeing you. It has a subject, it has a predicate, it has an object, right? It has 3 things. So I can sort of visually show this as 2 dots, a subject and an object that are connected by some predicate, right? So the seeing is the predicate that interacts me and you. Okay? Now this is the universal structure, not just for grammar, but basically for all sorts of experiences. Language obviously encodes our experiences, so it follows this structure. So you have subject, predicate, object. Every sentence you speak, if you just pay a little attention, you will notice what the subject is, what the object is, what the predicate is. The same thing is for communication. I'm a sender, you're a receiver, there's some medium. For every experience, I'm a knower, you're the known, and there's some knowing happening. Same for any experiment that you do. Prepare something, some interaction with some measurement device and you measure it. Almost anything that you can do in the world follows this broad structure, right? So now let's take the other sentence which was in the other thing, which was I see a white slide background, right? This background is white. I see a slide background. It has some property white, and I see it. Okay. This also follows the same structure. But here there's something more. I have a notion of property. And this experience, now I give it a tag. I say, okay, I have a slide background, which is a notion of shape. I have a white color, which is a notion of color. I have all these other properties. But again, end of the day, it's just an experience and you're giving it additional tags. Right? It's just an experience. Right? So what you mean by a property of something, end of the day is just an experience. And an experience is nothing but this trio of subject, predicate, and object. Okay? Again, nothing I'm saying is deep. Everything is very simple, 6th grade grammar, all captures all of this. Nothing more fancy than that. But here's the interesting thing. There was this thing where I had the sentence to the right, which was the slide background is white, and I turned it into I see a white slide background. Both of these have the same content. Right? The semantics is not any different, even though the like syntax is different. The first is a statement of experience, as I stated, but the right is a statement of reality. Right? So this is called a realist assumption. Right? You say that independent of my observation or my experience, I can assign properties to objects. Right? The right side is a very efficient way of saying the right sentence is a very efficient way of saying the left sentence, because we all assume that whether I looked at the slide or not, it was white. Right? Whether I looked at the slide or not, it was white. So I don't need to keep saying I see a white slide background. I can just say the slide background was white, and if I see it background. If I don't. So independent of our observation, subjects, objects, and predicates persist. Right? Independent of our observations, properties are assigned to objects. Right? So this is the assumption of reality. That means independent of whether I look or not, things are there. And they have properties. Yes, but I have to probe them. I look at them. I hear them. I touch them. I taste them. But properties are there. And whether I interact with them or not. So subjects persist, objects persist, predicates persist, whether you engage with them or not. Right? So that's the realist assumption. Okay? So again, subjects, objects, predicates, they just seem to persist independent of anything else. And this is how we make sense of the world, and that is why this is represented in our language. Right? Language represents our experience. So in language, we see that we can make sense of it. Because subjects, objects, predicates seem to persist whether we look at them or not. And this is called the realm of knowledge. Or the word that's used is jnana. And you can actually notice it here. Sometimes people wonder why is that K there in knowledge. It's essentially a residual memory of the fact that the root is jnana. And that becomes kna, and we just drop the na and it becomes knowledge. But that's why we still put the K in for knowing or knowledge or anything like that. So within the realm of knowledge, you have notions of language, experience, communication, experiment. All of these are statements of knowledge. So this is how basically the first 2 pages of that text goes. But then Master E.K. asks, well, what is the state of wisdom? The word that he uses is Veda, which comes from the root vids, and which is vid, which in the Latin cognate is just this, and that's wisdom. Okay, so what is the state of wisdom? So I will not dare to say it in my own words, so I just put the screenshot of the actual text. So the actual text says, but wisdom is a little bit different from what we call knowledge. Okay, so we've already discussed what knowledge is. Statements of subjects, objects, predicates, statements of experience. If you can imagine a continuum of these three here being subject, object, predicate, that is, if through any process you can exist as a screen which includes the 3 simultaneously, okay, then this screen of our consciousness we call Veda. When we can reach that consciousness of simultaneity of the 3, then what we experience is called Veda. Yeah. It's unfortunate that we, again, talk about all this in language, so we have to use the word experience to mean two different things when we mean two different things. So, but that's what we mean by Veda. Okay, cool idea, but why should I bother, right? I'm sorry, because realism doesn't work, and that's the crazy part. So I made this assumption that subjects, objects, predicates, and in our experience, they usually all just persist. Properties are there. We are just probing and figuring out. Apple is there until I eat it. I don't know whether it's good or bad, but I believe that before I ate it, it was good or bad. It's one of the two, right? Then that's the assumption of realism. But realism doesn't seem to work. So why does it not work? Where does it not work? So this is what I'm paid to do usually. So I study quantum theory, and quantum theory is the physics of the very, very small. Okay, we are celebrating the centenary of Master Ike's birth. It's also the centenary of the birth of quantum theory, incidentally, half a year, I suppose. So quantum theory describes the physics of fundamental particles, atoms, photons, particles of light, molecules, so coffee molecules, benzene, whatever, and many, many more, even pretty large things. So quantum theory describes all of these. But the remarkable thing about quantum theory is that if you do a quantum experiment, again, now let's remember what an experiment was. We define an experiment. It's like some preparation, some interaction with some observer. That's what an experiment is. It's not just the system itself. It's always that interaction, sort of that entire experience that is an experiment. If you take into account everything, a quantum experiment does not obey realism. What does that mean? It comes through the formalism, it comes through experiment, and this has been known now for like almost 100 years. Quantum systems do not have well-defined notions of property until they are observed. Until they are observed, there's no notion of property. Obviously, when I observe it, it does something, and then I can write a sentence about what it did. But then, with that, if I want to construct a model in my head that, oh, this is what it was a priori to measurement or a priori to observation, you can't do that in a consistent manner. I can do that with my phone. You can look at it, I can look at it, we all can look at it, and we can all figure out what the properties of this phone are. But when you do that for quantum systems, so for instance, photons, or the energy levels of electrons and atoms, or things like that, you can't do that. You can't make that assumption. When you observe it, yes, you get some experience. But collating all those experiences collectively and trying to create a picture of underlying properties or intrinsic properties, you can't create a picture like that. We cannot assume that these systems exist with intrinsic properties that we probe by observation. You can't make that assumption. So that is an anti-realist view. You don't have a notion of reality. Reality means, like, what's the reality of the situation? It means you're asking what actually happened there, whether you were there or not there, whether someone saw or didn't see. Here you're saying that that assumption breaks. There is no notion of a reality. Right? It's not like you don't know a reality. There is no notion of a reality. Properties emerge during experiments. There aren't any properties you're probing a priori. Properties are emerging during experiments. And this was known from the start, like, there are all these quotes. First, I show these quotes now so that you should read them. It's very nice that over 50 years they could find very succinct ways of saying the same thing. So the first quote from 34 is like, okay, quantum theory, it's not about what really happens, but it's like how phenomena are conditioned by an observation, lots of English. And then 20 years later, they say it in a nicer way, like, what we observe is not nature itself, but how nature is exposed to our method of questioning. But then I think the most succinct way was by Asher Perez, which was unperformed experiments don't have any results. Usually we think that an experiment already has a result, some result. Your job is to go figure out what it is. Right? The ball is either black or blue, you just don't know until you open the box, then you know what it is. But what this is saying is until you open the box didn't have a notion of black or blue. The ball didn't have a notion of black or blue. There was no property until you did that observation. Okay, so again, let's go back to this thing. So what we called as a property, or sort of the sum word for an experience, was the subject, object, predicate. So if I say properties do not pre-exist, then subject, object, predicates also don't pre-exist. Because they're the same thing. There's no real difference between the word property and subject, object, predicate. They're the same thing. So that means during experience or an experiment or communication, subject, object, predicates emerge simultaneously. They emerge. And neither one emerges uniquely, they all emerge together. Right? So I'm also going very fast. I assume people will have questions, so I buffered for time. So if there are questions, I'm happy to go back and forth. So yeah, I'll actually stop. If anyone has questions, please ask. You want me to say something again, I'll say it again. But if people have not understood anything, I'll just say it all again. It's all right. Keep going. Keep going? Okay, cool. So that's so right. So if and yeah. So again, the remarkable thing about quantum theory is that we didn't come to these conclusions by contemplating under some tree in some mountain. The origins of quantum theory were as mundane as you can imagine. The German government financed a professor to find out a more efficient way to make light bulbs. And he was trying to figure out how to make these early light bulbs glow longer or faster or something, more luminosity or something like that. Very mundane thing. And once you start looking at just these systems that you find in your dirt, if you just start paying attention even to them more carefully, you're forced to these conclusions. There really isn't any other choice. You're forced to these conclusions. So I don't want to make this seem like, oh, this is some great esoteric thing. No, this is a thing that's very, you just have to pay attention to some, you pay attention to the atoms in this chair, you'll see the same. You pay attention to the atoms in your socks, you'll see the same. There's nothing unique about this thing. So quantum experiments don't obey realism. So again, during experience or during an experiment, during any form of communication, the subject, objects, predicates emerge simultaneously. Right? So more fundamental truth. So this was a picture I showed earlier, which is a subject, object, these are there, and they sometimes talk to each other through a predicate. But there's a more basic truth, and this is the figure from that book, from the Purush's book, where subject, object, predicate are now placed on equal footing as vertices of a triangle or edges of the triangle. Right? So the known, the subject to be known, and the process of knowing. So the subject, object, and predicate are in this triangle. Okay? And the origin of that is a notion of existence, right? And then everything else is basically like everything else. So basically, in that circle, you can have lots of triangles. This is one such triangle. In principle, we create trillions such triangles every day in all the experiences we have, right? So we basically have existence. So this is probably similar to where you are when you're like in deep sleep. You're just some localized existence. And then something happens and you become experience. Okay? Something happens. So what are the things that happen? Subject, object, predicate simultaneously emerge. Properties emerge. Right? And this is usually called a state of duality because now you have something else. It's not just nothing, it's you and something. So there are two things. So that's a state of duality. Okay, great. But we know that in quantum experiments or in experiences of that scale, pre-observation they exist in a state where properties have not emerged. But the system is still there. The system is still there, but properties have not emerged. Right? So that means that there is an intermediate, I don't know if people can see walking, but that means there's an intermediate state between these two. Right? And that, call it whatever you want, just give it some name. So we will just call it like non-dual awareness. Right? We will give it some name. But the important thing is it's a state where experience has not emerged. But it's not just existence, something else. And I know this not from some deep meditation I did. I know this because the data I get from my experiments is forcing me to believe that this is what, there is something there. Right? It's not you, there is some intermediate state that is there. Okay? So this you can call the background for all experience, if you like it, because all experience happens on it. Right? Now, if you are in this state, we can observe possibly the simultaneous emergence of subject objects predicates. So you can see how experiences emerge. And this, I would presume, is the state of wisdom or Veda. Right? Now let's read the same sentence. But wisdom is a little bit different from what we call knowledge. If you can imagine a continuum of these three, that is, if through any process you can exist as a screen which includes the three simultaneously, then the screen of your consciousness is called Veda. When we can reach that consciousness of simultaneity of the three, then what we call is called Veda or wisdom. Right? So that state, I have to show it with some pictures, so I show that picture. That might not even be the correct picture. Doesn't matter. But it's something. Right? So you don't have experience, but you have something that's not just existence. So it's a state beyond language, because language encodes experience. They're saying no experience, but it's beyond experience. It's beyond communication. Not talk about it, and I'm talking about it. It's beyond experience, as I said. It's beyond experiment, clearly, right? You can do experiments, but sort of collapse to sentences that can't be collated together in some sensible manner. So it's clearly beyond experiment. And as I said, this is not some merely psychological supernatural state. We are compelled to acknowledge such a state even by looking at physical matter carefully. We are compelled, like there is no choice. And the way that I the way that I understand this is that sort of this collective acknowledgement of the state. Yeah, nobody calls it non-dual state. You'll never get tenure if you say that. So, but some collective acknowledgement of this sort of state is sort of again being understood collectively in humanity. Quantum theory is one example where that's happening, right? At least at the physical level, by just looking at systems more and more carefully, you can see you're forced to believe that a state like this is there. And the surprising part is you're actually harnessing. You can actually harness this. And this to me is the truly remarkable thing. So this is like the next step. So all of our current paradigms of information and communication were built on the idea of senders, receivers, and some medium in between. Right? That's how they were all built. But what if I can communicate or compute in a regime where that trio is not fully there, partially there, but definitely much less so than what is there in our experience. That seems to be what quantum theory is pointing to, just at least even at the physical level. And don't, I could be saying all kinds of things. If you go across the street, people are throwing billions of dollars at this. So there's something to this. This is not someone's fancy thoughts about something. This is real. This is actually translating to real technology. But even though it's translating to real technology, its basic underpinning, its basic idea is that we are somehow managing to touch a state that is beyond experience. It's beyond just this notion of subjects, objects, and predicates. Nature has it. Nature has that state, independent of whether you realize it or not, whether someone wrote about it or not. It's there, right? And there are different ways that we manage to reach to it. It's remarkable that someone could sit under a tree in some mountain and figure it out. But it's also remarkable that someone could not try to figure it, not try to think about something completely arbitrary, like trying to make those bulbs more efficient, and again stumble on the same idea. Someone stumble on the same truth. Right? And this is opening up immense possibilities, both scientific and technological, because it's the 100th year. This is the 100th, it's denoted the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology for that reason. This is stuff that Google makes, I think in LA or something. This is stuff that happens in San Diego, Mexico. There are all these lasers communicating. I think this is an experiment. So you have all of these things. So we are actually harnessing these states. And that's evidence to the fact that we are able to touch upon the state that is beyond experience, beyond the subject-object predicate, confines of language and experience. So, what is true? I put the symbol to say something. This state that is beyond subjects, objects, and predicates, beyond experience, beyond language, seems to be a bit truer. It's more firm, it's more steadfast, and it's more close to what is than our experiences. Right? So, yeah. Yes, please.
You will definitely get tenure if you come to the university. Yeah. I think I'm reading a 3 C thoughts of Mr. CBD. And not much explanation is necessary, but I think you pretty much elaborated on one. The truth levels. Just from Master CBD. That explains quite a bit. In other words, the reality of truth. Second, Master A.K. explains in Patanjali Yoga Sutras, truth is the relationship between perceiver and perceived. That is one of the rich definitions of example. That's what you're saying there in your call expect. In other words, it's the relationship we establish with anything. The driver is sleeping on the chair. The chair does not exist with anyone, right? In fact, the slide is not white, it is black, it's not white. So the truth levels are there, and then the truth is the relationship that perceiver establishes perceive. And the last one is you also touched upon this without using the Sanskrit equalism, the 4 stages of speech, how it originates down. Yourself as your thought, as your awareness, I'm doing knowledge. So it's beautifully done. Thank you. You'll definitely get it.
Any other questions? I think there's sometimes.
If you were ready to go ahead to a couple of slides.
Yeah, of course.
Yes. Yeah.
This one?
Yeah. So why would you say that it's state beyond experience?
Why would I say it's a state beyond experience? Okay. So language problem. What I mean by experience here is all experience that I know is subject object predicate. I don't know any experience beyond that. You can tell me if you do. I don't. Okay.
Subjective experience.
So this is where I think I would be a little careful. To me, even the notion of a subject emerges because there is an object. I don't think subjects exist without objects. Even the notion of me comes because I have already created some notion of other. Even if I'm thinking within myself, your thought is objective to you, and there's a notion of you, object, that is different from that thought. So,
when he sees all we know.
yeah,
Even most of the very easy. The other now,
Yes.
that is essentially what you mentioned.
Yes.
So, the experience, I think,
yeah, it's a little odd because all notions of experience that we have, as you said, are subjective experiences. Subjects emerge in those experiences. I agree that we say when even Mastery says this, he says experience, that experience is called. Wait, I think he's also suffering with the confines of language. Here, experience means two different things.
I mean, the way I really understood this is like in your picture, like, once you get to that realization, the triangle,
Yes.
and you no longer tend to see the triangle because you live your life in the triangle. But then when you get to the state of that experience, which is really at the Buddhic level,
Mhm.
the triangle disappears, and then that is what remains. So it's not that it's not there, it's just that you stop recognizing that, hey, there are three different stages. You would kind of get to a conclusion that this is all part of the same state, which is just broken into three parts. So rather than, I mean, in it exists, but you don't tend to see it anymore in the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, again,
That I am slightly very low. You don't have an idea, you don't have a thought, what that is. Third, non-sense of it. Sometimes the experience cannot be explained fully. And that itself is a subjective experience, which you cannot explain in your language. So the language has its own barrier to explain your complete experience.
language. Sorry.
The language has its own barrier. You cannot explain the complete experience of your experience.
Yes.
That itself is a subjective experience. So there itself, you cannot explain what it is.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So that itself is a subjective experience which you only can experience but cannot be explained.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think I would be careful from using the word again subjective experience. Because, yes, language is even worse than experience totally. Like, obviously, there are lots of experiences we have that we can't capture in language. Right? That's obviously true. But that there is a state where even subjects fall off is, I think, what is being pointed at here. Like it's obviously there are subjective experiences that can't be fully captured in language. That I think most of us experience in our lives. But that a place where even subjects fall off, but there is something there. Yeah, that's what's meant.
So this is all to say that there are concepts beyond evolution, the faculty belong to, and the language that cannot be brought down, which is a reason why people say teaching and explanation. But oral communication is not a way.
It's horrible. It's horrible.
You can stay here for a day or two and still going down and down and down on the difficult concepts.
Yeah.
Why people convey the concept of intuition. And that's what Master Vijay said.
Yes, please. Sorry.
Atmanandam, which cannot get this words. Jiva experience.
Absolutely is what we are saying. When you get into the levels of meditation, where you seems to be basically your existence is now. It's like there is that high or individual existence in this way. And interestingly, the topic that you picked, the quantum physics, right? Where there is this called frigidity Kafka. I might not say his name correctly, but he says that quantum physicists have evolved to a state from saying the observer and the observed to participator and the what is this. So the participator is where the science of Veda, Master Ike says in his writing that you become that.
Yeah.
And quantum physics also is heading towards that direction, and he appreciates the fact beside this. So,
That's point you have to do personal linear state. Can you say so?
Yeah, yes, of course. Yeah.
So he says, but the system is little bit different. So if you can imagine a continuous screen. So your consciousness is called Veda. And the moment you reach the consciousness simultaneous of the three means. So as long as you are knowing these things,
Yes.
knowing that is knowledge.
Yeah.
Once you have become that, that's a wisdom.
That's wisdom.
That means you yourself is a wisdom.
Yes.
When you know yourself, there is no three, only one exists.
Yeah.
That itself is a wisdom.
Yes.
That is the meaning of it.
Yeah. Yes.
I only wanted to compliment you, very good subject, the way you draw parallels, and then you can see from the audience how engaged they are. So it's like, it's bringing out that spirit of the master, and everyone is kind of trying to chime in. That itself speaks volumes of what you're trying to present on the screen. It's not an easy subject, but the way you draw parallels is really commendable. Thank you for bringing the sand into it and getting the conversation.
Yeah, so when I saw your slides, I thought I could copy over so that now quantum theory is going to be stable, and that even now she people out of the class have to explain somehow. He says, I can't explain, I have experience.
Yeah.
Even whatever I explain, it cannot be true.
Yeah.
Then how where quantum theory is leading?
So I think, yeah, I think the place where it is remarkable is it essentially happens by recognizing contradiction. Right? And that's what why can we happily assume that subjects, objects, predicates persist? Because we don't see any contradiction with that assumption in our daily life. We can make that assumption and live our lives happily, and we will not, most likely not face any contradictions in our day-to-day experience. Place where you are forced to think that there's probably something else is where that assumption starts getting contradicted. So that means that you take something that is much more, like using the word, but let's say profound, and you project it down to your experience. It doesn't capture all of it fully. Some part it does very clearly, and that's what we lead our lives with. But there are some parts that it doesn't. And there, if you think about it carefully, you start seeing contradictions. Quantum theory is just a name we've given to the framework where these contradictions become very clear. That's it. It's just a place where these contradictions have just become very clear. So for that, we had to come up, again, this is again the remarkable thing. Even though those contradictions are there, mathematics has a way of still finding a language for it. It's not normal language. It's not English, it's not Telugu, it's none of these. It's a different kind of language. You have to create different kinds of algebraic structures to capture it. But you can. Because it's still something. And you can capture it in math. And we do. We do manage to do that, and you can learn this. Go to the internet, Google it, and you can learn it. And you can learn how these systems behave. But every time you try to put your lens of, oh, that means that this is what it is, and this is the properties it has, it breaks up. All these notions break. This is just a different kind of notion that is beyond subject-object predicates that is there. And you have to get used to it. And you get used to it after a while. And you say, okay, that's it.
Like from physical world, this looks like fictitious. So then, how these experiments really help?
Okay, so yes, sir.
I'm trying to posed by it. Couple of things, right? One is how do you use the idea into doing work with multiple things and right. So if you're having bits now, right? They're pretty complex. They have zero or one thing, right? Now if you're having states that then sometimes like this, you can process a large amount of information in short of period. So then information transfer. There is a particle here, I mean, you get the information instantaneously. Imagine.
To me, I think the most basic insight is that it comes from this notion of wholes and parts. In the world that we live in, we can completely understand the whole by looking at its parts. If you fully understand the parts, you understand the whole. That's not true fundamentally. When you make a whole and you break it into parts, you fundamentally lose some things. And this process of creating this, something and another, and this process of sort of creating these partitions is what we call experience, is what we call communication, is called what we call experiments. That is where we lose things. There's a notion of a whole, and this whole becomes parts. And it's only when it becomes these parts that there is experience, there is properties, there is everything happens after that. Language comes there, stories come there, life happens there, everything happens there. So without this, but when you do that, there are fundamentally things that you lose. And actually you see that in quantum theory, where if you take a system and you make it into parts, first thing you realize is that the way you make it into parts is arbitrary. There is no canonical way of breaking things into parts. There's an infinitude of ways of breaking things into parts. And different things make different assumptions of what is important and what's unimportant, so on and so forth. So,
Yeah, one thing.
yeah.
So we are breaking everything into parts means as we are in the Aquarius age, there was a prediction that man can make himself dissolve into the quantum level and he can again build his body with the molecules wherever he wants to go. So that is one of the predictions. That's even in the Master CV when he said when the flight airplane was invented, he said, why do we need aeroplanes? We can fly. So in the same way, in this Aquarian age, there was a prediction that definitely at one time man can go into the cabins. That's what Master VK in one of his books he said and lectures, man can go into one cabin and he can select the destination where he wants to go. And he can push a button where he can dissolve into the atomic level and he can go to the destination where he can build again in the another cabin. So it's a time travel, whatever we call it as, so without any distraction. So the quantum theory makes you and lead you into that level where you can dissolve yourself into the quantum level or the pre-molecule level, but still you yourself exist, but you are not in such a molecular level. It's a different subjective level you are. So again, you can build your body whatever the way you want before, and again you can do that. So those are the fiction theories we have heard in like Lord Krishna, how he made it. Those are all the things. These are all the Neptunian related things. That's what Master even in the astrology he says. So the quantum theory leads you to up to that level where you can take. That's the prediction for the humanity. Maybe by the end of or maybe in another 1 or 2, 3 centuries, we don't know. So that is the latest thoughts develops in the humanity. So that leads to maybe that we go there. We don't know.
Yeah.
Let us.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry? No, I'm a postdoc. I'll be joining as a postdoc at Quantum Institute in University of Maryland. From Duke.
Have 16 years?
Done? Done?
Should I leave the meeting?
No, are you done?
I'm done.
Okay, then we'll start with. Okay. Thank you.